Hello, hello. Hi, everybody. I'm Hannah. I'm from Expat Therapy Hub. You probably haven't heard of us yet. We've just launched. We are an online platform specifically for expats, providing mental health support through trained, qualified professional psychologists and therapists. I founded the business with my business partner here, Stephen, and just give you 2 minutes about what it is all about. Basically, we have 35 multilingual therapists from 19 countries speaking 13 different languages. They cover most of the mental health issues such as addiction, ADHD, self-harm, all of the relationship issues. And it's very easy to sign up. It's free. Most of our therapists offer a 15-minute free consultation, and sessions start from $60. One of the most important parts of the site is that we have a teen section. So we have specialist therapists who deal with teen, adolescent issues. Anyway, Expat Therapy Hub, and we're very, very lucky to have Matt here visiting Bali for a couple of months, and he's going to talk to you about ADHD and neurodiverse challenges. Thanks, Matt.
Thanks, Hannah. Hi, everyone. My name's Matt Thomas, and that's me up there. I'm going to talk into this microphone because this is being recorded, but I'm less comfortable using microphones, so please just bear with me. And so I'm here today to sort of tell you my story, and then reframe it through a modern mental health perspective. Let's just put it like that. And I'm not here to preach. I'm not here to lecture. Feel free to interrupt at any time if you've got any questions. And let's just try and have some fun. This is definitely the nicest place I've done a schools talk, beyond a shadow of a doubt. And you guys all look like a really lovely crowd. So I think the only rule I'd say today is let's have fun and be open-minded, and that includes me. So a little bit about me. Why am I qualified to give this talk? So I'm in recovery from addiction, number one. That's probably the biggest thing. In fact, Tuesday was my 19th recovery birthday for being in recovery from addiction. I had a really troubled adolescence. I was diagnosed with OCD at age 14. I was sent to my first 12-step meeting for addiction at age 16. I then naturally went into the music industry, where there's so much camouflage for people who suffer from issues like that, and spent 30 years there. But about 11 years ago, I pivoted into the mental health field because I'd seen so much carnage of my own and of other people's while I was in the music industry. That I decided to pivot and start helping people in the music industry, which is what I did. So I qualified as a coach and an addiction practitioner. I started a charity called Music Support, which is now almost 10 years old in the UK. And that provides a lot of services for people who need them in the music and associated industries. I qualified as a mediator, and I've been about 10 years. I've been also a private crisis manager, like helping people when the wheels come off. I was brought up as an expat myself. That's another important qualification for today. My dad was a diplomat. I was born in Canada and spent a long time living and going to school in France and in the USA, particularly in the USA in my most formative years. So there we go. And I do lots of fun stuff as well. I'm involved in several charities. I do loads of creative stuff online. I write a lot, and I've been a storyline consultant for the English people here to Emmerdale, Casualty, The Archers, and a lot of other documentaries. So when they have storylines about addiction or mental health, they'll send me the scripts and I'll kind of read through them and say, this is real, this is rubbish. So I'm really trying not to swear today, but please forgive me if I do. This is real, this is rubbish. And then often they take my advice. They ignore me a lot as well. So if you see a really bad storyline that's unrealistic, then it's something that they ignored my advice on. Most importantly, that was meant to be in red, but there you go. I'm a youth advocate. So I draw from my personal experience as a troubled adolescent to offer support and guidance to young people in schools talks, coaching sessions, and stuff like that. So that's not an advert because I'm not allowed to work here. That today's very much for free, just in case anyone from immigration's watching. But it's just that's kind of what I do. So moving swiftly on, these are some of the projects that I've been involved with recently. So I do talks, I do lectures. I wrote a speech for this young lady on addiction. You might recognise her. And then I was lucky enough actually to go to the Palace and film her, and then kind of produce this little film. That then went out. It's available to watch on YouTube, and my knighthood's in the post. It hasn't arrived yet. I make films. There's a film I made a couple of years ago about addiction. I have a podcast called Empathy for the Devil, where we look at musicians who passed away too soon, and we examine their lives from a modern mental health perspective. My sabbatical is spent writing this. It's called the Urgent Response Guide, which is a step-by-step guide for talent-facing professionals whose artists are experiencing anything from a concern to a crisis. And that's coming out 1 week today. I thought I had 2 weeks, but because of the weird February dates, I've just realised my deadline's only a week, so I'm in a bit of a panic about that. And I'm launching a learning platform called Get Attuned, which is for talent managers, which is pretty cool, transforming how you navigate the human side of talent management. Anyway, that's enough about me. I just wanted to say I wrote this slide specifically for today, and it's really, really, really important because talking to parents in particular, I just really want to stress that I do not believe there's anything, there's no such thing as neurotypical. Neurotypical doesn't exist. We're all somewhere on one of those spectrums that people talk about, and that's what makes us human. That's what makes us unique. It's what makes us wonderful. It's what makes our kids unique and wonderful, and the absolute gorgeous little individuals, sometimes really frustrating that they are. I'm a father of 4 daughters and 2 steps. And so, as a parent, also I relate. And also, what I'm going to be talking about today is when things get out of hand. This is not the norm. I'm not by any means saying that anybody in this room or their children suffer from any of the conditions I'm going to talk about. It's literally or that they ever will do. It's literally what I'm trying to do is tell my story, and then and maybe help find a bit of balance, and maybe be able to start spotting the signs of when something is going a little bit wonky. So that's it. It's kind of like, that's my disclaimer. But my foundational line, my baseline, is that everybody is individual, unique, and wonderful. So, and this is really what I'm talking about today, is the common ground between addiction, OCD, and ADHD, because it's been my experience, and it's also backed up by a lot of really interesting research, that there's a massive, I call it the splat, there it is, there's a massive common ground between all of these areas, and that's where it exists. And in my experience, it all came to fruition when I was in early adolescence. So it's almost like a button got switched on when I was about 13. Let's get rid of the splat. In clinical terms, it's called comorbidity. There is a high comorbidity rate between all of those things. And so, here's a few examples of the kind of behaviors that can be part of one of these conditions, or actually all 3 of these conditions. And I won't go into it. We'll make sure you can have the PDFs of these slides if you want them afterwards. But impulsivity, compulsivity, dopamine dysregulation, which basically means, I'm sure everyone knows a lot about dopamine, so I won't teach you how to suck eggs, but it basically means behaviors that are seeking the release of dopamine, which is one of the one of the neurotransmitters that makes us feel good. It makes us feel rewarded. And dopamine dysregulation often means that it's kind of like we don't really know when we are satisfied. We don't really know when we've had enough. So it's kind of like, it's been described as the disease of more. It's kind of like whether it's alcohol, food, sex, things that are actually perfectly normal, sugar in the day-to-day world, dopamine chasing behavior is common in all three of those conditions, but also, I hasten to add, really common in normal people as well. So-called neurotypical people. So dopamine chasing behavior does not necessarily mean that there's something wrong. And things like executive function deficits, which is basically a complicated word for, not being able to do things very well. So my executive function is terrible. I'm really, really clumsy. I'm really bad at planning. I'm really bad at organizing. And all of those three things can show up in addiction. It's very obvious why it shows up in addiction if you're falling down drunk all the time. But also it shows up in OCD and ADHD. And again, functional impairment, which is almost the same as executive function deficits. And then the key here is that all of these things are self-soothable. Which basically means, and we're going to talk a lot about self-soothing. Self-soothing is basically when something makes us feel bad, we find ways to make ourselves feel better. It's really simple. It's as simple as that. And so all of the symptoms of ADHD, including some of the darker ones that I'm going to get to, and OCD, which are pretty much all dark, and addiction, you can self-soothe your way out of it. And for a long time, the self-soothing actually becomes the cure. So in other words, the best example of that is OCD. Actually, OCD is an anxiety-based disorder. And the cure for the anxiety is the rituals or the compulsive behaviors that then come in, and they're designed by the mind, by the adolescent mind, to relieve the anxiety. So that's what I mean by self-soothing. Or self-soothing in addiction, it can be like, I went out last night, I got drunk, I made an absolute fool of myself. I wake up this morning, I feel really ashamed. So what do I do to relieve that shame is I have another drink, right? So that's an example of self-soothing gone slightly wonky, or in my case, very wonky. So I won't dwell on this side. These are a bunch of research papers that, and only quite recent ones as well, that highlight the links between, in particular, ADHD and the development of addiction. And the ones that I've circled with my little red virtual pen are all the ones that apply to adolescents. So there's a lot, and it's increasing every day, all the time, of actual research, evidence-based research that shows that basically I'm not talking twaddle. And I've got a list of all the research papers somewhere that I'm more than happy to share if anybody's interested. And now I'm just going to say this. When I'm talking about addiction, I just want to be really clear. Addiction is a potentially deadly biopsychosocial, spiritual, cultural condition. I'm not going to go into that in too much depth today, but it basically means that somebody who becomes addicted will have been affected by a combination of their genes, their mental health makeup, their social circumstances, their spiritual feelings about life and God and who am I and do I belong and am I connected and who am I connected to, and their cultural environment, which is to say I'm from the UK and I was brought up in America. And in both of those cultures, drinking is very much a coming of age thing. So that was very, very normal. In some cultures where alcohol is banned, for example, there might be a different cultural environment. And so that's what I really mean by biopsychosocial, spiritual, cultural. And so all of those things can affect whether or not someone ends up suffering with addiction. And also, addiction contains a lot of socially acceptable habits, and again, including coming of age recreational habits for experimenting and curious teenagers. So that is to say that just because our teenagers are experimenting or being curious or, acting in ways that we're not entirely sure about, it doesn't mean to say that they either have or going to develop a problem with addiction. I just want to make that absolutely clear. I'm not labeling everyone as suffering from addiction. That would be really pompous of me. And anyway, the only person who can diagnose addiction is the person themselves. In context, I just wanted to, I wrote this slide yesterday, and we are going to, because this is something that is so big, this is a talk in itself, but in the left-hand column are everything that didn't happen when I was a teenager. I didn't have access to any of the things on the left. And so, I won't read out the list, that would be really boring. But these are just some of the things that could become problematic for our teenagers and screens. I mean, if I'm perfectly honest, I'm terrified for my 8-year-old. I'm absolutely terrified of what is going to happen to her in relation to tech. But there's nothing I can do about it other than monitor and try and keep an open mind, because there is a good side as well. And so I've put a bunch of stuff on the right because I wanted to balance it out slightly. Tech isn't all bad. There are definitely some things that are going to be available to our kids that weren't available to me, and that are going to change the shape of the world, no doubt. So it's not all bad, but it is potentially problematic. But what I've written there is balance, intention, and awareness. It's just a matter of trying to adhere to those things and provide a little bit of balance. That's my belief. And then just generally, these are the other kind of socially acceptable things: alcohol, medication, gambling, gaming, food, sex, relationships, shopping. I mean, these are cigarettes, nicotine. These are all things that are potentially really, really addictive, and they're all completely socially acceptable. And then, so it's weird that a lot of cultures actually promote, endorse a lot of behaviors that can lead to developing into problems. And it's also weird that there's actually very few things that aren't socially acceptable. So most things that we can get addicted to are totally socially acceptable. And this list on the left, most of it is all fine. Of course it's socially acceptable unless it gets out of hand. And then this, I won't dwell on it for too long. This is called the Jelinek curve, and it's a way to measure. It's a clinical thing that's been around since the 50s, and it's a way to measure the progression of addiction in an individual. And just for context, really, that red line that I've circled there, occasional relief drinking. This is about drinking, but it applies to all addiction. The occasional relief behavior, that's where we are. We're right up at the top left, and to get to the bottom right there, can take 1 to 50 years. So we are right at the beginning, potentially. Anything that's happening potentially, we're right at the beginning of this journey. That's the other thing that's really important. So I'm not scaremongering at all. I just wanted to put that into a bit of context. So as I said, when I was 13, 14, I got diagnosed with OCD, having had a really, really difficult time. And OCD is basically, like I said, it's an anxiety-based disorder where we have very, very intrusive thoughts and a lot of fears, and the way that we think we can cure the intrusive thoughts or the fears or stop those fears from happening is by acting out compulsively. And some examples of compulsive behavior can be cleaning, it can be doing rituals, it can be muttering, it can be counting, it can be turning light switches on and off, it can be organizing. So, I could be like, the thought I might have is, my parents are both going to die in a car crash today. And the compulsion would then be, but if I organize these things on this table perfectly and count to 7 and turn around 3 times, they're not going to die. And that was my experience. I'm not trying to be funny. It was actually my experience. It wasn't quite exactly that, but it was very ritual and compulsion based, to the extent that often when I was about 14 or 15, I couldn't get out of bed unless I did the rituals or compulsions correctly. And for me, it was muttering, it was saying things in a certain order, it was touching the floor in a certain way, it was getting dressed in a certain way. It was all very, very, very meticulous. And how it feels is absolutely terrifying. It's like it is such a big burden to have OCD, and it feels so shameful to have OCD, because the difference between OCD beliefs and psychosis is that in OCD, there's probably 1 or 2% of the brain that knows it's not true. So in other words, well, my parent, I know that actually my parents aren't going to die in a car crash if I don't do all this stuff and turn around 7 times. Oh, thank you. That's very kind of you. But I have to do it anyway, because the element of doubt is too powerful. So I have to do these compulsions, even though I might know it's not really true. And that is terrifying, frustrating, and shameful. And that's literally how it feels. And just a bit more, this is to highlight what I said a little bit more. There's that American rhyme, step on a crack, break your mama's back, and the kids who try and avoid the cracks in the pavement, got to be really difficult here. And if I do this, if I step on this crack or any crack, something terrible is going to happen. So actually, how on earth am I going to leave this room? Well, I'm going to have to stand on here, although this is full of cracks, so that's going to be difficult. And then I'm going to have to hop from that beanbag to that beanbag to that, then to that. And then, oh my God, and the stairs are full of cracks. So actually, I may as well not get out of bed, because I'm just not going to be able to manage to do it. And that's more like the picture on the right, which is where everything, so it goes from like a hopscotchy game to where everything becomes really, really terrifying. And there's elements of the supernatural. There's something called magical thinking, which is where you think that impossible things are going to happen. In the mind of a 14-year-old, that's just super duper overwhelming. So I got to the stage where I couldn't go to school at all until I got some help. And so there you go. What's it like to have OCD? Well, these are some of the things, like the excessive perfectionism. So like what might present as someone being really organized and ordered, they might actually be doing that because they've got some really scary thoughts that they're too embarrassed to tell you about. Reassurance seeking. So it's kind of like, God, I was always doing it with my mum. It's like, Mum, do you think if I do, do you think that food's been poisoned? Or do you think that man over there's really a wizard and he's put a curse on me? And my mum would go, no, don't be so ridiculous. And that is a good example of reassurance seeking in OCD. So there's one thing to look out for. If you're constantly being asked questions about, is this going to happen? Is that going to happen? Some of it's perfectly normal, but when it becomes a bit more compulsive, it might be time to look at it a bit closer. And overt attention to detail. Sometimes we become obsessed with detail. And then the rituals, which can often be secretive. I became brilliant at doing my rituals so nobody would notice. They thought I was a bit eccentric. It's like, Matt, why does it sometimes take you 5 attempts to walk through a door? And stuff like that. But normally, you could, if you're looking for them, you can spot them. And then another sign of OCD is really high anxiety about everything, particularly seemingly meaningless things. Like I was working with someone who had OCD recently. This was an adult male, and he was obsessed with the fact that he'd been caught on camera driving through a red traffic light. And he was so obsessed with it that he would email, text, phone about 10 times a day saying, do you think it caught me on camera? Do you think it caught me on camera? Do you think it caught me on camera? Eventually this guy jumped off a balcony in a shopping center because he couldn't deal with the anxiety. And he's okay, I'm pleased to report. but it was a bit of a cry for help doing that, I think. That's like a whiz through OCD. Now let's just talk about ADHD as well. I'm presuming that people here are a little bit more familiar with ADHD than OCD, I won't dwell on it for as long. But it's basically, these are the things that we know about in ADHD. So if we have a child who's diagnosed or we suspect, the reason I got to my own diagnosis was because I was helping one of my daughters get a diagnosis. And these presentations here, impulsivity, inattention, disorganization, and restlessness, they're like what I'd call the classic symptoms and presentations of ADHD or other neurodiversities. And I won't dwell on them for too long because I want to talk about the darker side of ADHD, which is what doesn't get talked about as much. And I call them the Y words just because they've both got Y's in them. Rejection sensitive dysphoria, or RSD as it's known, and emotional dysregulation. And really the crucial one here is RSD. And basically, what have I written here? Doesn't respond well, typo there, sorry, doesn't respond well to criticism or rejection. Here's innocuous comment as criticism or rejection, and this is absolutely killer. Reads facial expressions and other non-verbal cues as criticism or rejection. So rejection-sensitive dysphoria is all about A, I can't handle rejection, and B, I see and hear everything as criticism or rejection. And that is something that if left untreated, it goes on to plague us in adult life. This is the example that I always use. When my wife asks me if I've emptied the dishwasher, what I hear is, you haven't emptied the dishwasher, you're a useless piece of beep, I'm going to divorce you and you're going to die alone. And so I will respond and I'll go, no, of course I haven't emptied the dishwasher. I've been really busy, but I was about to do it until you asked me. And then we have a screaming row. So that's an example of rejection-sensitive dysphoria in adulthood. I'm pleased to say I've done the work, so it doesn't happen anymore. But it did happen for a long time. And, combined with a lot of other things like trauma and relational trauma, it can be really, really, it can ruin relationships. And actually, I wish that more people in adult relationships would get treatment for RSD, and it would really help with communication and probably lower the divorce rate. Anyway, that's another story. And then the other one, which goes along with it, is emotional dysregulation. Because emotional dysregulation, basically, and we all know about this one, is when we can't manage our emotions, we can't regulate our emotions. And if you think about it, it's hard enough for the developing adolescent brain as it is. It's really difficult being an adolescent. It was horrible. I was miserable for years. And I'm not saying that's everybody's experience, but emotional regulation is hard at the best of times. So if you suffer from emotional dysregulation, it makes it even harder. And emotional dysregulation basically means, I can't manage my emotions. So I'm either oversensitive or short-fused. I blow really quickly, or I cry really quickly. I have frequent outbursts and extreme displays of emotion. So it might look like a lot of door slamming or a lot of isolation, or probably both at the same time, door slamming, then isolation. And it can include feelings of like, I'm the best thing in the world, I'm the best since sliced bread, I'm the best thing since sliced bread, you'll never know as much as I know, to I'm the biggest piece of, at the center of the universe, everybody hates me, and I'm just going to go and lie in my room for 2 days without leaving. Or in my case, about 6 months.
Sorry, Matt.
Yes.
I have a question.
Yes.
What will you be saying about, because you're talking about the symptoms, will you be also saying about how to cure it?
Yes.
The work you did, etc.
Yes.
This will come in a second.
It's coming. It's not all bad. So this is how I felt as an adolescent with ADHD in particular: misunderstood, frustrated, overwhelmed, inadequate, and guilty. Nobody knew how hard I was trying to do all of this stuff, to be on time, to get my homework done, to tidy my room. Nobody knew how hard I was trying. Yet all anybody did was tell me how crap I was. All anybody did, my teachers, my parents, my friends even. And so that's how I felt. And feeling like that as a teenager can lead to terrible negative self-beliefs as an adult. That's the point. It's kind of like, because eventually you grow to believe that those things are true. And then that becomes your baseline. And so that's how I would go out into the world. That's how I would go out and be expecting for all of these things to happen. And expecting all the negative things that people had said to me that I'd internalized, expecting them to be true, which is not nice. And then, after some self-medication, that's how I felt. So when I was about, 14 or 15, I had a beer or two or three, and then I felt like that. And then I decided to make it my absolute life's mission to be as drunk as I could, as often as I could, because that's where I found my relief. And that is a perfect story of the development of addiction. It's not anybody's fault, by the way. I'm not blaming anyone. It's just I'm able to recognize what happened. It's like I finally found a way to stop those feelings, to stop the fear of OCD, and to stop the negative self-beliefs and the rejection-sensitive dysphoria and the emotional dysregulation of ADHD. And that's how I felt for about 3 hours. And then it all comes back, and then I wanted more. And then that was the cycle of my life from age 16 to about age 38. And so this is the really crucial bit. It's like where everything connects, and then the relief-seeking behavior gets out of control and takes over. So what's next? I won't go through all of these because it would take too long. And so, but this is kind of like, the column on the left is the presenting traits. The column in the middle is the thoughts and feelings associated. And then the column on the right is relief-seeking behavior. And, like I said, it's not just alcohol or drugs that is relief-seeking. There's loads of other relief-seeking behavior as well. But it's just, these are just some of the ways that OCD can lead to addiction of various degrees, and I hasten to add, relief-seeking behaviour is also perfectly normal. It's just when it gets out of hand that it's a problem. And this slide here as well is exactly the same thing, but it's about pathways from ADHD to addiction. I like to focus on this one a little bit more because of that middle column in white. These are all the thoughts and feelings that I was talking about before that can be really, really dangerous for adolescents to internalize and become their reality. And these are the ones that can turn into the relief-seeking behaviors in the column on the right that, if they get out of hand, can lead to problems in earlier or later life. But, again, a lot of the relief-seeking behaviors are perfectly normal, perfectly healthy. And my favorite thing there is the bit in red, the special interest obsession, because it's been my experience time and time again professionally. I work with a lot of musicians, I work with a lot of athletes, and I work with, in very inverted commas, talent, because everybody's talented in their own way. But often someone who's struggling, age 13, 14, 15, might find music, they might find sports, they might find acting, they might find art, they might find painting, they might find programming, they might find a very positive thing that they become obsessed with, and then that becomes the thing that saves them and gets them out of their situation and into a different situation. Then I get them when they're in their late 20s, and the thing that saved them as a teenager has stopped saving them as an adult. But that's a different story and a different talk. But what I'm trying to do here is just illustrate the process from like what's going on in the left-hand column to the thinking and feelings to then the stuff in the right-hand column that can go a bit wonky or very wonky. But here we go again. Self-soothing, relief-seeking behavior is perfectly healthy and normal. It leads to the ability to self-regulate as an adult. And that's the key. So if we are developing into into healthy, emotionally healthy adults, we will have developed the tools to self-regulate. So I don't fly off the handle at my wife. So I don't go into deep depression or, really high manic self-belief. Everything can be nice and balanced and normal. It's only when it gets out of hand that they can become an issue. And this was me after 20 years of untreated relief-seeking behaviour. So that's where it got me in terms of, this was in 2006, about 6 months before I went to rehab for the 7th time. That is the splat of addiction, OCD, and ADHD. That's where it got me until I was that person. And it was not a fun journey. So if this talk can help anybody else avoid that journey, because I'm a massive, massive believer, and I've seen it in action, that if we are able to look and deal with some of these issues when they come up, we can actually prevent the journey of addiction from developing, and the journey of poor mental health from developing in our teenagers. So it doesn't have to go the way that it went for me. To answer your question, here we go, we have to look behind the presenting behaviours. This is the slide, this is the most important slide today. These are just some of the ways that we can deal with it, and that we can build protective, we can put our adolescents in a protective bubble that will help keep them away from the splat. And I hasten to add, these are just a few of them, and I'll just, and I can see a lot of them in action here at the Green School, which is absolutely amazing. I know that there are different beliefs about things like, medication, should we or should we, the traditional clinical diagnosis, should we or shouldn't we, all of that. But, it's been my experience, I'm just going to move over here if that's all right. It has been my experience that assessment, diagnosis, and medication can be absolutely game-changing and life-saving. There's absolutely no shadow of a doubt. However, it's also my understanding that there's a lot of people that don't necessarily believe that, and it's absolutely their prerogative. In which case, there is mindfulness practice. I mean, I couldn't believe it. I walked in here this morning and all the kids were doing yoga. I mean, how amazing. But things like mindfulness practice, yoga meditation, coaching, for example, are all things that can really, really, really help avoid getting into the splat. And then this is slightly controversial, but I'm a massive believer in it, so please don't shoot me down, is that family support and family therapy are probably two of the most important things in helping to avoid this happening, because our adolescents spend most of the time at school, but outside of school, they spend most of the time at home. And it's a lot of the unconscious dynamics at home that can sometimes exacerbate what's going on. And I'm a great believer that, if everybody had family support and everybody went to family therapy, the world would be a lot better place. And then the other point is, those last two bubbles there, peer support, group therapy, and community and school support. And peer support and group therapy can also be really important, because I thought I was the most screwed up individual in the whole world. I had no idea that there was anybody else going through any of the stuff that I'd been going through. So the idea that some peer support would have been available to me is just mind-blowing, and I think it might have made a difference. And just going back to the family support, it turned out that my mum, bless her, she's gone now, had suffered from terrible mental health issues when she was in her late teens, early 20s. And she'd been very, very sick. And so when I was going through this as an adolescent, she yelled at me. And the reason that she yelled at me was because she was scared that the same thing that was going to happen to me that had happened to her, which it actually did. So imagine rewinding that, and instead of her yelling at me and telling me I was going to end up on the street homeless talking to myself, because that's what she used to do, she'd point to people on the street and say, that's how you're going to end up if you don't stop this stupid behavior. Imagine if instead of doing that, she'd sat me down and she said, look, Matt, I just want to tell you that when I was your age, I went through exactly the same thing. And it was really difficult, but I got through it. And I'm really going to help you go through this experience as well. Imagine what a difference it would have made to me. So, you know, that's a real life story of how the family support, family therapy side of things can work. Now, really, I'd love to be spending a whole presentation on just this slide because it's the most important slide in the whole thing.